Hey second grade, Mr. Schultz here with a brand new video where we will learn about the table of contents. The table of contents is a page found in many books, usually nonfiction books, that gives us information. The job of the table of contents is to let us, the readers, know what we are going to read about and what page we can find that information on. For example, this is a table of contents page found in a book about famous presidents. As you can see, there are many different topics and page numbers found in the table of contents. First up, we have the introduction, found on page 1. Next is chapter 1. This is a chapter all about George Washington, America's very first president. Information about him can be found on page 3. Next up is Chapter 2, Thomas Jefferson. Information about Thomas Jefferson can be found on page 14. Next is Chapter 3, with information about Abraham Lincoln found on page 27. Then we have Chapter 4 on page 40, giving us information about Theodore Roosevelt. Then on page 56 is Chapter 5, all about John F. Kennedy. In the last two sections of the table of contents, we have the index found on page 71 and the glossary found on page 73. The index is a list of important names, places, and things in alphabetical order, and its job is to give us the page number associated with each topic. The glossary's job is a lot like a dictionary's job, but a glossary will only tell you the meanings of unfamiliar words from this book. Now, let's answer some questions about this page. Question number 1. Which president can you learn about in Chapter 3? So the first thing that we can do to find this answer is to just look for Chapter 3. Here's Chapter 3 right here. What does this say? The president that we can read about on Chapter 3 is Abraham Lincoln. Next up, which chapter talks about Thomas Jefferson? So, we got to find Thomas Jefferson. Here he is. Which chapter talks about Thomas Jefferson? Chapter 2. Which president is the last one you would read about in the book? This is our first one, our second one, our third one, our fourth one, here's our fifth one. And there's no more after him, so he is our last president. His name is John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy is the last president we would read about in this book. If you wanted to find information about George Washington and his service in the military, on what page would you start reading? Well, here's George Washington. He's in Chapter 1. What page is he on? Oh, here we are, page 3. More information can be found on page 3 about George Washington. And our last question says, on which page can you find the meaning of unfamiliar words that you might read in a book? Well, if you remember, back when I was talking about the index and the glossary, the index is just a list of words with their page numbers, but the glossary is a list of words and their meanings. So here's the glossary. Let's go all the way over. The glossary can be found on page 73. That's where we're going to find the meanings of unfamiliar words. All right. Here is another table of contents. This one is found in a book called Whales of the Great Deep. I am going to read this table of contents, the chapters, and the page numbers to you. Then, in your homework, you will be required to answer some questions about this table of contents in Pear Deck. The introduction to Whales of the Great Deep can be found on page 1. Chapter 1, Where Whales Live, can be found on page 3. Chapter 2, What Whales Eat, can be found on page 11. Chapter 3, The Life Expectancy of Whales, can be found on page 17. Chapter 4, The benefits of whales can be found on page 24. The index can be found on page 32. And the glossary can be found on page 34. Remember that the glossary is the place where you're going to find the meaning of unfamiliar words. Your homework questions will be included in Pear Deck, but here's a heads up for what you can expect. Question 1. In which chapter would you find out if whales eat other fish? Question 2. In which chapter would you find out how long whales live? Question 3. On which page can you find the meaning of unfamiliar words that you might read in the book? Question 4. What would you read about in Chapter 2? And question 5. What page does Chapter 4 start? Alright guys, that's all for today's video. Time to get started on your homework. In our next video, we will learn more about glossaries. Until next time guys, have a great day. Bye!